we have more than a president here at Westmont College. We have a pastor as well. And Gayle's going to come up and speak in just a few moments here. I hope you're keeping these wonderful handouts he gives us every time he speaks. I wish I would have had something like this when I was an undergraduate. A comprehensive view of what it means to grow as a Christian and to be formed after the image of Christ. And so whenever Gayle comes, I'm just delighted to get the next installment, and he has some of my favorite poems in it as well. But Gayle Beebe, we love you. We are so blessed to have you as president. Will you come and share what God's given to you?
Yes, we have a special guest a little bit further into the message this morning, and so we need to have the microphones up here. Well, it's great to be with you. I love the opportunity to be with you in chapel and also an opportunity to speak with you about the things that matter most to me. And the things that matter most to me include the kind of life that we live with God and the kind of way in which we understand the discrete experiences of our own life and how they fit into God's great plan, both for our own life and for the greater purposes of the kingdom of God. Now, I like to give a handout so that you have something to take away if you get caught texting or emailing or twittering during the message. You can always come back and go, now what exactly was he talking about? And you'll have an ample outline. But the front cover and inside the front cover are really ways in which I like us to think about approaches to understanding our life with God, the way in which we learn to think theologically. What are the ways in which we become an embodiment of the life and spirit of Jesus? And I think in so many ways, the call of our life as Christians is to understand, both in word and deed, the way in which Christ expects us to live. And that this has a great intellectual rooting, but it also has a very vivid life expression. And so the front cover shows the various wheels, the outer wheel being the 7 approaches to our life with God, the next wheel showing the 6 ways in which we gain knowledge of God: Scripture, reason, tradition, experience, creation, and culture. And then the next wheel being the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, ultimately is a full-bodied expression of our life with God. And on the inside, it just gives those an outline form. This morning, though, we're going to come to George Herbert. And George Herbert was just a great Christian, lived during the 17th century. He was born 1593 and then had his fruitful ministry in the early part of the 17th century, living in England, a very turbulent time. Those of you who've studied church history or even modern European history know that this was a period of great unrest, both on the European continent and also on the English Isle. And so here was Herbert, the younger brother of Lord Herbert of Cherbury, the founder of deism. And George Herbert, who could have had the most remarkable life and could have graced all of society, English society, chose to become a country parson. And in serving as a country parson, began to think about, what does it mean to understand our life with God? And how do we make progress as we understand and live our life? And so the way in which I've outlined this morning is to really amplify a few key passages of Scripture, to look briefly at Erik Erikson and his 8 psychosocial stages of development. I think that they're actually really helpful to our understanding of the Christian life. And then to look at 4 poems from Herbert before we have this brief interview. So let's get started. The 3 key passages that I really think are so critical to understanding our life with God. The first from John 1:4. In him, meaning Christ, was life, and that life was the light of men or of all people, used in the generic. Now, when you look at life and you look at it in the context of the Gospel of John, the word for life that John repeatedly uses is Zoe. And Zoe means eternal life. Bios is physical life. And Zoe is this life that originates in God alone. And to experience the fullness of life in Christ means not only to have a sense of how our biological existence is going, but really to awaken spiritually and to have both the capacity to receive knowledge from Christ, but also the willpower and the desire to live with the fullness of Christ in our own life. The light, the idea of light, photos or photon, this idea that light gives growth, light brings things to life. One of my favorite 20th century philosophers, Simone Weil, a French philosopher during the middle part or early to middle part of the 20th century, often compared the light of the sun to the love of God. And she used this analogy. She said, the light of the sun is the only power in nature that can cause a plant to go against gravity. And she said, this is the same way in which the love of God works on our ego. It's the only power in our life that causes us to go against our own self-centeredness. Now, when you think about the life of Christ, what is Christ inviting us to do? He's inviting us to learn how to move from being self-centered to being other-centered, to becoming not just self-aware, but to become aware of the needs of others, and to develop a capacity for empathy that goes beyond anything people can generate on their own. The second passage, Philippians 1:6 and 9 and 10, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it to completion. And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless until the day of Christ. Now, why do I amplify this passage? This is such a clear expression and reference to the fact that our life with God develops over time. And we have to have this perspective that where we are today, we have very real needs today, and we need Christ to help us resolve those. But 10 years from now, there's going to be all kinds of new experiences that come into your life, and you're going to have to be actively involved with God 10 years from now, just like you are today. And all along the way, God will be with you, walking with you, guiding you, instructing you, bringing you in contact with people who also love and follow God. And it is these experiences and these relationships which actually help usher us through life. And the kind of understanding of the spiritual life that George Herbert speaks to is this idea that it's not just a one-time event or these brief experiences or encounters we have at different periods in our life, but it's really this sustained relationship with God over time that includes all the experiences of our life, including all the relationships of our life. And then finally, Colossians 3:3, and we're going to come to this as one of Herbert's most famous poems, for you died and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. Now, I wanted to just put up on the screen on the overhead just this graph. When I was in seminary, I was first introduced to Erik Erikson. Well, I'd been introduced to him as a general ed class in psychology as an undergraduate, but we actually had to study Erikson in a class that dealt with spiritual formation. How do we come to understand our life with God and how we make progress in it? And my professor in seminary really wanted us to understand that there were many naturalistic ways to look at life cycle development that were so compatible with anticipating that we would go through different phases or stages, and we needed to be comfortable with that. We needed to recognize that every stage of life has certain natural realities, but also every stage of life has spiritual realities, and we need to be mindful of that. Now, as we come to Herbert, one of the things that I love about Herbert is this great poem, The Temple. And The Temple was written as a record of how Herbert believed we entered, made progress, and completed our life in God. The first poem that he gives, it's interesting. The structure of the temple is the church porch, the main body, which is just called the church, and then the final two poems are called the church militant. And by the church militant, he means the church beyond itself, the church impacting, going out into the world to change society. But when you look at Herbert's poem, the altar, which he starts with, is how do we enter this life with God, and how do we make our life a living sacrifice based on the sacrifice of Christ himself? Now read along with me. And as you notice, he's going to have both words and design that reinforce the message. And this is just one of the beauties of so many of Herbert's poems that he communicates in multiple ways so that we see both the beauty of the words but also the aesthetic of presentation. And he really believed, I don't spend any time on this, that beauty was one of the ways in which God actually reaches us, that it's through beauty that we encounter God, the beauty of words, the beauty of nature, the beauty of presentation. A broken altar, Lord, thy servant rears, made of a heart and cemented with tears, whose parts are as thy hand did frame, no workman's tool hath touched the same. A heart alone is such a stone as nothing but thy power doth cut. Wherefore each part of my hard heart meets in this frame to praise thy name. That if I chance to hold my peace, these stones to praise thee may not cease. O let thy blessed sacrifice be mine, and sanctify this altar to be thine. This is just an incredible call for us to enter the life with God with a spirit of humility and to recognize that it's God alone that can actually penetrate the cold, stony heart of human indifference. And throughout the ages, people have awakened to the reality of God, often having had a climactic experience, a divisive experience, a destructive experience. And in each case, these openings have been the penetrating love of God finally awakening in the person a desire to actually find a deeper reality to life. Now, Herbert goes on, and in the next poem, Paradise, he refers to the fact that we don't just, life is just not, a smooth boulevard, that it is filled with all of these kinds of challenges. And we can look at them one of two ways. We can look at them as insurmountable obstacles that really are in our way, or we can look at them as experiences God uses to prune and reprove our character. And I really prefer to look at the setbacks in life as opportunities for God to prune and reprove our character. Now, again, listen to the words, but also notice the structure, because what Herbert is wanting to illustrate is he himself, as he writes the poem, prunes the words, so that we get this sense that God is pruning us, not to punish us, but for maximizing our growth, for giving us an even greater likelihood of growing in our knowledge and understanding of Him. I bless thee, Lord, because I grow among the trees which in a row to thee both fruit and order owe. What open force or hidden charm can blast my fruit or bring me harm, while the enclosure is thine arm? Enclose me still for fear I start, but to me rather sharp and tart, then let me want thy hand and art. When thou dost greatest judgment spare, and with thy knife but prune and pare, even fruitful trees more fruitful are. Such sharpness shows the sweetest friend, such cuttings rather heal than brand, and such beginnings touch their end. And so we can begin to recognize that there are greater purposes at play in our life, and not just setbacks, but opportunities for God to actually reprove us and correct us and create in us a capacity to go even further with Him and make an even greater contribution than we first imagined. Now, as we go through life, there are great obstacles, and certainly in my own life, the great obstacle for me, there were two. I wanted to know that Christianity had intellectual credibility, and I was troubled by the problem of evil and suffering. And as I've shared in other chapels or in other settings, it was a 5-year process of me really sorting out, what did I believe about God? What did I believe about faith in Christ? What did I believe about the Christian community? And all along the way, I felt just a great deal of love. I felt the tremendous love of the Christian community, the tremendous support. But I wanted to know that Christianity made sense and it had intellectual credibility. And Pascal was the great answer for me, that Christianity is reasonable, worthy of respect. It doesn't prove everything. It doesn't explain everything. But there's enough light for those who want to see and enough darkness for those of a contrary disposition. And I knew I really wanted to see. But then the next big issue for me was, how do you make sense of the problem of evil and suffering? And it was also initially through Pascal, but then also other great thinkers in the history of the church, that I began to recognize that suffering comes to all of us. It comes to us often in different phases, different periods. And when people weep, we're asked to weep with them. When people rejoice, we're asked to rejoice with them. And in part, it's a recognition that none of us ever weep at the same intensity, or we rarely weep at the same intensity as those around us. And when we lose a loved one, thankfully the Christian community can come around and really carry people during their times of afflictions. But this didn't explain all of the challenges or all the problems of evil and suffering that you face as you go forward in life. And I know that from 0 to age 22, when I graduated from college, I look back on that time, and I'm not idealistic about it. It certainly had setbacks, but it didn't have any of the traumatic setbacks. People hadn't died out of order. There wasn't a lot of disruption or chaos in our immediate families or extended families. But from age 22 to age 30, everything happened. Everything seemed to be coming apart. And I look back on that 8 years following the first 22 and just recognize the way in which God began to be real to me in a completely new way. And that it was by me responding to the problem of evil and suffering as it entered my life, and it entered those I love the most, that I began to understand God at a deeper level. Now, when you read this poem, Affliction, it's talking about how do we begin to understand these great experiences that are so disruptive, but how can we redeem them? How can we respond to them in a way that helps us understand that all of us suffer, that our ultimate destiny is not this life, but it's a life of eternal love with God, and how can we begin to make our peace with it? My heart did heave, and there came forth, O God. By that I knew that thou wast in the grief, to guide and govern it to my relief. Making a scepter of the rod, hadst thou not had thy part? Sure the unruly sigh had broke my heart. But since thy breath gave me both life and shape, thou knowest my tallies. And when there's assigned so much breath to a sigh, what's then behind? Or if some years with its escape, the sigh then only is a gale to bring me sooner to my bliss. Thy life on earth was grief, and thou art still constant unto it, making it to be a point of honor, now to grieve in me. And in my members suffer ill, they who lament one cross, thou dying daily, praise thee to thy loss. All of us will suffer. Some of you have suffered dramatically already. But if we can find in God the deeper meaning for our suffering, we can be sustained in it. And I come to the final poem that I illustrate for you this morning, Colossians 3:3, and this poem is just so powerful because you can see the double motion of the poem itself, which is the analogy that Herbert really wants us to grasp, that all of us live a life that can be marked by births, deaths, anniversaries, graduations, whatever. But inside, there is a hidden motion where we are becoming conformed to the image of Christ over time. And the responses we make to our daily life have such a dramatic impact on what's happening inside of us as we're conformed to the image of Christ over time. Now, you can see the words and then the highlights are coming down. My life is hid in him that is my treasure, from Colossians 3:3. My words and thoughts do both express this notion that life hath with the sun a double motion. The first is straight and our diurnal friend, the other hid and doth obliquely bend. One life is wrapped in flesh and tends to earth, the other winds towards him whose happy birth taught me to live here so that still one eye should aim and shoot at that which is on high, quitting with daily labor all my pleasure to gain at harvest an eternal treasure. Now, each of these poems in their own way is meant to illustrate for us some of the great challenges we face as we come to our life in God. But the goal of the spiritual life isn't simply to resolve these things on an individual basis. It's to see the way in which they become a part of the great tapestry of our life and help us as we become conformed to the image of Christ over time. Now, as we develop, one of the great things that I have loved about an integration of faith and learning is the fact that we come to understand there are multiple ways that we gain insight into the life that we live and the challenges we face. And as I have gone through life, one of the great learnings for me has been the fact that all of our effectiveness begins with our sense of becoming self-aware. When we become self-aware, we can then become aware of the needs of others. And then through that self-awareness, how do we begin to manage ourselves? What are the ways in which we have to self-regulate? But then in that self-awareness, becoming narcissistic isn't the goal. It's become self-aware so that you can be other-aware. How do you become aware of others? And how do you develop empathy? How do you develop a capacity to really anticipate and understand the needs of others? And then ultimately, how do you engage life in a meaningful way as a result of both your self-understanding and your understanding of others? Well, to help us in this, I have asked our resident expert, Dr. Andrea Gurney, to join me this morning for a brief interview. Andrea, would you please come up?
Everybody. So.
I asked for the resident expert to come today, and so she's come complete with her lab coat.
Right.
I think I'm the experiment. Here are the three. Here are the three questions that, we'll just start with one, but I have three questions that I want Andrea to address. The first is, what are the key elements to forming a healthy identity?
So I would say there's many aspects, but I'm going to name three, and they'll be conscious contemplation, exploration, and then self-awareness. So let me break those down for you guys. Conscious contemplation is really this idea of thinking through your life's purpose and who you want to be. And I think as followers of Christ and as Christians, we want to be thinking, who does God want you to be? And what does God want to do with your life? Certainly, we all want to fit in and belong, and yet we also want to have an individual, unique sense of self and so to balance that tension of fitting in, belonging, and yet developing a unique identity takes conscious contemplation, really being reflective and intentional about who God has called you to be. And then exploration is the second. In the field of developmental psychology, we talk about different identity statuses, and 2 of the 4 are identity achieved and then identity foreclosure. And identity achieved is this notion of you have explored, you've tried on different hats, you've asked the hard questions, and then you've committed to an identity, as opposed to identity foreclosure, where you've committed to an identity but never explored. So I think an example of this, certainly as Christians, would be if someone was to say, why do you believe? Well, I'm a Christian because my parents raised me to be a Christian. That would be identity foreclosure, as opposed to identity achieved is, I'm a Christian because I've sought Christ. I've asked the hard questions. I've questioned my faith. I've debated. Yes, my parents raised me as believers, and I respect that, but I've done the work, and I've made it my own. So coming before God as followers of Christ and seeking his direction as we explore. And I know for a lot of folks, exploration can actually be really anxiety-provoking, and it can raise in us an angst. It can also be fun and challenging. And certainly if we do this with God and we ask him to open and close doors as we explore, then I think there's more identity achievement. I love the quote by T.S. Eliot that says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." And then lastly, self-awareness. And I think, Gayle, you named this idea of just know your story and do the work to know your story. What were the developmental challenges that you faced as a child, as an adolescent, now as a young adult? What were those challenges, and have you worked through them? Because I think you need to work through them in order to achieve a healthy identity. I often say to my students, you can only take someone as far as you yourself have gone. So what does it look like that you need to know your story and have done the work?
Okay, the second question, that's a wonderful answer, thank you. Second question, what are the biggest obstacles to forming a healthy identity?
And I would say the world we live in. And I say that somewhat jokingly, and at the same time, I think it's a fallen world. Since the beginning of time, there have been obstacles to all of us knowing our identity. If we literally were to look at how Satan tempted Adam and Eve in the garden, we're still living in that fallen state with our eyes fixed on the redeemed state. So I think there is truly so much competing for your hearts and your minds and your attention these days. We live in this consumeristic and electronic culture that is so rich and with resources, with material goods, with technology, and yet I think we are experiencing a poverty of connection. So I don't think we take the time to really develop genuine relationships and intimacy, face-to-face relationships. And yet, we are relational beings, imago Deo, right? Created in the image of God. And so what does it look like for us to discern parts of ourselves and our identity in relationships with others and in relationships with God? Research indicates that there are more identity crises today than there ever have been in years past. And we're actually not confined. Erickson postulated that identity crisis was confined to adolescence and young adulthood. And research today shows us that's actually not the case. So things that you named even, Gayle, starting a new job, entering a relationship, let alone a marriage relationship someday, the birth of a child, loss of a loved one. These are all challenges to identity development that I think we can either face head on and choose to explore during that time, or we can get lost in the transitions. And then one other thing that's an obstacle to a healthy identity is just trauma in a non-normative event. Truly there are some folks who have experienced what we would consider to be traumatic event, whether that be abuse or domestic violence or loss of a parent would be a non-normative event. And truly that would certainly be something that would be an obstacle to healthy identity.
Well, the last thing, I just wanted to invite you to say, what do you hope for our students?
Yep. And let me just, and as I said, that would be an obstacle to healthy identity, but it would also be overcome with Christ. Let me just add that.
Yeah.
So what I hope for you all is that I truly think that in a culture that values independence and mobility, my hope is that each one of you would remain rooted and grounded and connected. You know, we were all bought with a price, right, as Christians. And might you know that you are dearly loved, that you have been chosen, and that you're loved by the creator of the universe. Talk about identity achieved. I mean, that's it, right? Right there. And research indicates that those who actually commit to an identity, those who have achieved an identity, tend to live happier and healthier lives than those who are in that foreclosed or diffused state. So I think if your identity is in Christ, I would call that identity achieved. And you will walk through this life and through all hardships, but you will know that it is well with your soul. And so I would just conclude with truly my hope then for you would be the same that it is for my two little girls, which would be that you would know that I am loved, chosen by Christ. I am known, named by Christ. I am fearless, safe in Christ. And I am brave, always with Christ. Thanks.
Andrea, thank you. Please join me in thanking Dr. Gurney for joining us. Thank you. That was great. Well, as the worship band comes forward, we're going to close. Would you please stand? We're going to close with "He who began a good work in you" from Philippians 1:6. And just really encourage you as you work your way through your challenges through this semester that you find all that God has for you and become a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ. Thank you.